everybody, welcome to Dream GM. Today we are going to analyze the game between Mikhail Tal and Hans Joachim Hecht, which is held in 1962 in Varna, Bulgaria, and the tournament is Varna Olympiad Final Round 9 in October 9, and get the title of Misa Impossible. And we have opening is Queen's Indian Defense and Kasparov variation E12, and we have strongest computer in the world, Stockfish 17, analyzing the game here, and where Mikhail Tal playing as a white and Hans Joachim Hecht is playing as a black, and game start with D4, and it's a Queen's Indian Defense, and we also known as a Queen's Gambit, and Knight F3, C4, E6, and Knight F3, and B6. These all are standard opening in Queen's Indian Defense, like Kasparov variation. And Mikhail develop a knight and covering the center early in the game, where Hans is going to attack and fight for the center square in the later game, and Hans play the move bishop before pinning the knight to the king, and Mikhail also pinning the knight to the queen. Pinning is must play the most important role in game or mid game to win material or dominate the opponent. Hans playing bishops to b7 and controlling the whole light square, and also controlling the dark square as well. Mikhail protecting the pawn or opening light square for his light square bishops, and Hans is attacking the bishops. If he comes to f4, he can attack again. Mikhail maintaining the pin to the queen, and Hans capture the knight on c3. It's equal trade, but he's making ugly to black white position by taking the knight on c3. He's making like double pawn and trying to create some weakness to the queen side of the board. And we have moves d6 play by Hans, trying to fight for the center. Knight back to d2, like go to the b3 square, and like e4 square to trade the knight on f6 with the bishops pinning the knight to the queen. He can't castle now, so he fight for the center, decided to trade some pieces. He's not taking because he takes with the pawn and pinning the knight to the queen. This will be dangerous, or if black takes, he can just take with the pawn with maintaining the good pawn structure in the center of the board. So Hans play the move queen is 7, trying to bring out the queen in the game. And if white castle to the king side, he can attack with the queen. And we have a move e4, trying to cover the light square, which is covered by the bishops on b7, and trying to close the center with maintaining good pawn structure in the center of the board, like legendary 5 or 4 pawn structure. And he develops a other knight. Mikhail develops a bishops and trying to castle to the king side. And Joachim can either castle to the queen side or can castle to the king side. He bring back the knight to try to try to jump on g6 square and attacking the bishops on h4 square, and making unpin the knight on f6 square. And he's attacking the center with this his damage pawn to try to thread the center. And he takes d takes c5 and d takes e5. He takes this pawn to win the knight, because this knight can't move because of the pin, but queen can take the pawn. He takes with the queen. Now no longer pin is here because queen is moved to e5 square. And Mikhail giving check, and he blocked by the pawn on c6. And Mikhail decided to castle, not defending the pawn. And attacking the bishops. Hans attacking the bishops with the knight. And bishops have 3 square to go wherever he go. Actually, bishops to g3 and e1 are the best square, like he is going to protect the pawn in the future. He's attacking the queen. If he takes, then he can check and win the bishops. So queen back to e6, and Hans have like move b5, attacking the queen and the knight at the same time. And Mikhail play the move e5, letting Hans forking the queen and the knight at the same time, and try to win the knight and the pawn and threaten the rook in the at the end. Like he play the move b5, attacking the knight and the queen at the same time, as I mentioned before. He takes the knight. Not he is not escaping a queen, like he's going to sacrifice the queen, and just he takes the knight here on f6. Hans take the queen, and now Mikhail have down a queen, but he can win the move, like he playing rook to e1 or rook a e1 also, but he didn't do that. He just take the pawn on g7 and attacking the rook. And he moved the rook and attacking the pawn at the same time. And Mikhail play the move bishops to f f5. It's actually a trap for Hans. If he take with the queen, he can check and win the queen at same time. So bishops to f5 is a trap actually, but Hans didn't fall for the trap, and he's also going to sacrifice his queen in the game. So he take the bishops, dark square bishops on h4 square, and Mikhail take the queen on e6 square. And now Hans is pinning the knight to the rook, but this knight is also defended by the bishops, so he can move. He gives a check by and threat to win the pawn f7 pawn, and Hans play the good move by attacking the knight and the bishops at the same time, and Mikhail play the best move in the position, bring back the bishops. If if you take my knight, I can take your bishops, is equal game, like that. So he takes the pawn, not taking the knight at early game, and threaten to check on g2 square. He attacks the knight, the pawn, but this pawn can't take the knight because of the pin. He can double up in the future, like double a battery of rooks on g file to attacking the king, and he takes the knight on d6 square, and Mikhail take the bishops on a6 square. And now Hans have a queen, Hans have a knight, rook, and other rooks, and he moves the bishops and trying to come on e3 square in the future. And now Mikhail Tal have two rooks and one bishops, and now Hans is actually a pawn up here. He have double pawn, but the weakness here, like those two pawn are not connected, and both are in the same file, and these two pawn are on c file, and f f7 pawn and h6 pawn are also not connected. So these are the weakness created by Mikhail Tal to Hans Joachim position, and in the future he can attack those all the pawn. It's very difficult to defend those all pawn, especially they are not connected with other, like these three pawn are connected with each other. They can protect themselves, but those black pawn are not going to be a queening because no one is protecting others. We can play like that to win. f6 played by Hans, and we have a moves rooks to d1, checking the king and controlling the both open file. Mikhail Tal covered both open file here, and he can go to rook b7 and win the rook, or like trading the rook, because this rook is protected by this knight on f5. 6 king move to d file, and both king are now active in the game. This knight is no square left, like he can't come there, and this only square is controlled by the rooks. He played to move c4, and Mikhail attacking the knight on f5 square. Knight back to e7, and Mikhail pinning the knight to the rook. If knight moves in other square, he can just take the rook. He make a double battery, and he can now move the knight everywhere and attacking the pawn. He takes the pawn on c4. Now both have equal pawn, but Mikhail have like connected pawn and pawn in the good position, but Hans have a weakened pawn all over the board. Play the move knight d5, attacking the pawn on c3, and also thread the pawn on a2. Bishops take the knight, both trade the knights and the bishops, and Mikhail is attacking the rook, attacking the pawn with the rook. He can attack this pawn, and trying to check and win this pawn and this pawn as well. No, not a single pawn are protected in the position. So he attacked the pawn on c3. He take the pawn on a4. If he take, he can check here and win this pawn and threat this pawn as well. And at the same time, he take the pawn on c3. Mikhail's give a check and threat. This file is covered by rooks, so he can't come there. He have to come like c file or d file. He decided to come to c5 square, and Mikhail take the pawn on f6 and attacking the pawn on h6 at the same time. If he gives a check, he can block with the rook and save the pawn on a2 square. This is not a threat. He defends with the pawn. If he takes, he can just take with the pawn, and his both pawn are fine. And he takes on g4, and as takes g4, we have to move. Rook to h7, try to check him with h2 and win the pawn on a2. This is the plan of Hans Joachim. He is not care about the pawn on a2 now. He can try to push the pawn on g5 square, which is only 3 square away from queening. He's attacking the pawn. He just defend with the rook. He gives a check, but he can defend. But if he gives with check with here in h2 square, then he can lose the rooks on e2. So he have to move the king to g3 square. This is a good move, and king comes to c4 square, doubling up the rook. Mikhail doubling up a rook here, and he gives a check. He can trade the rooks on c2, and his a2 pawn is now protected, or like no one can attack him, but he moves pawn forward, like only two moves away from queening. Rook back to h1. If he moves the pawn now, he can check with g1 and win the pawn on g6 or in g7 square. He gives a check. King back to d3, and he trade the rooks. This rooks is attacking the pawn on a2. He can trade the rook on c2 now, and he have a move rook to g2, so he have to move up king. King back to f4 square, and if he threaten to win, or like attacking the pawn, he can just simply block with the rook and promote the pawn. And black also have pass pawn. He can also pushes and queening. He is attacking. Hans is attacking the pawn on g6, and he block with rook g5. And here Hans Joachim has resigned the game. Here I can show you some variation with computer moves. Like now Mikhail is up of 5 or 6 point of material. Here is a checkmate.